Ang Chan II's demise, a kingdom adrift, 1834. The long and tumultuous reign of King Ang Chan II finally drew to a close in 1834. His health, likely undermined by years of relentless pressure, political maneuvering, and the profound sorrow of witnessing his kingdom's disintegration, failed him. His death plunged Cambodia into an immediate and perilous power vacuum. For years, the question of succession had hung like a storm cloud over Odong, and now it unleashed its full fury. Both Siam and Vietnam, having carefully cultivated their respective factions within the Cambodian court and royal family, immediately moved to assert their influence over the choice of the next monarch. The stakes were incredibly high. Whoever controlled the Cambodian throne would effectively control Cambodia itself. From the west, Siam vigorously championed the cause of Prince Ang Duong, Ang Chan II's half-brother, who had been living in exile in Bangkok. Ang Duong, a capable and experienced prince, represented Siamese interests and was seen by many Khmer loyalists as a legitimate alternative to Vietnamese domination. Bangkok saw his ascension as an opportunity to reassert Siamese influence over all of Cambodia and roll back Vietnamese gains. However, Vietnam, with its deeply entrenched presence in Odong and Phnom Penh, was quicker and more decisive. Having meticulously cultivated influence over Ang Chan II and his family for years, they were poised to dictate the succession. The Vietnamese emperor Minh Mang, driven by his Nam Tien policy, had no intention of allowing Siam to gain ground. He sought to ensure that the next Cambodian ruler would be entirely subservient to Vietnamese interests, transforming Cambodia into a mere province of Vietnam. The Vietnamese proposal was audacious. Instead of a male heir, they would place Ang Chan II's eldest daughter, Princess Ang Mey, on the throne. This move was strategically brilliant from a Vietnamese perspective. A female monarch, particularly one with no prior experience in governance and who had grown up under the shadow of Vietnamese influence, would be perceived as weak and easily manipulated. It circumvented any claims from powerful male princes, especially those aligned with Siam. Ang Mey's ascension would symbolize Cambodia's complete dependence on Vietnam, effectively turning the kingdom into a Vietnamese protectorate or even an annexed territory in all but name. The Khmer court, weakened and terrified, had little choice but to accept this arrangement. The power of Vietnam was overwhelming, their garrisons omnipresent, and any resistance would have been met with brutal force. Thus, in the aftermath of her father's death in 1834, Princess Ang Mey, a young woman unprepared for the burdens of kingship, was thrust into the role of monarch, not as a sovereign ruler, but as a reluctant puppet, signaling the beginning of one of the most tragic chapters in Cambodian history.
The Reluctant Queen, Ang Mey's Coronation, 1834. In 1834, amidst a climate of profound national sorrow and foreign manipulation, Princess Ang Mey was officially crowned Queen of Cambodia. It was a coronation unlike any other in Khmer history, a lavish spectacle designed by the Vietnamese to legitimize their control, yet utterly devoid of true Cambodian sovereignty. Ang Mey, a young woman who had spent her life in the confines of the royal palace, witnessing her father's struggles and the constant erosion of her kingdom's independence, was ill-prepared for the immense burdens of the throne. She had not been trained in statecraft or military command, skills traditionally reserved for male heirs. Her character, likely shaped by the anxieties and intrigues of her upbringing, was one of quiet resignation rather than assertive leadership. The anointing ceremony itself, while adhering to traditional Khmer rituals, was meticulously orchestrated and heavily overseen by Vietnamese mandarins. Their presence was conspicuous, their watchful eyes scrutinizing every detail, every gesture. The traditional symbols of Khmer power, the crown, the regalia, the royal scepter, were bestowed upon her, but their meaning was hollow. Ang Mey wore them not as a sovereign ruler, but as a carefully placed figurehead, a symbol of Cambodia's diminished status. The symbolic significance of a female ruler in Cambodia at this critical juncture was complex. While there had been powerful female figures in Khmer history, a queen reigning in her own right during such a period of intense crisis was seen by many as a sign of the kingdom's ultimate weakness and vulnerability. For the Vietnamese, it was a practical choice. A queen, lacking a strong power base of her own and dependent on their protection, would be far easier to control than a male prince with established loyalties or military ambitions. Vietnamese protection was, in reality, outright control. They presented Ang Mey's ascension as an act of benevolence, safeguarding Cambodia from Siamese aggression and ensuring stability. However, the reality was that Vietnamese garrisons were strengthened, Vietnamese officials were integrated more deeply into the Cambodian administration, and every aspect of governance, from royal decrees to provincial appointments, required Vietnamese approval. Ang Mey's role was to sign documents, attend ceremonies, and maintain a semblance of royal authority, while the true power resided with her Vietnamese advisors. The capital of Udong, once the vibrant heart of the Khmer kingdom, now felt like a gilded cage. The palace was filled with Vietnamese guards, and Ang Mey herself was under constant surveillance. Her personal freedom was curtailed, her opinions disregarded, and her authority a mere illusion. This tragic ascension marked a new low for Cambodia, a kingdom whose very identity was now being systematically dismantled. Ang Mey, the reluctant queen, became a poignant symbol of a nation's profound loss, forced to preside over the slow, agonizing subjugation of her own people. Her reign, though brief and largely powerless, would forever be etched in Cambodian history as a period of profound sorrow and foreign domination.
The protection of Vietnam, Cambodia under Trens Tay Tung. With Queen Ang Mey firmly on the throne as their puppet, Vietnam moved swiftly to formalize and deepen its control over Cambodia. This era saw the establishment of Trens Tay Tung, or the Western Citadel Command, a direct Vietnamese administrative body created to govern Cambodia, effectively reducing the ancient kingdom to a province of the Vietnamese Empire. The facade of Cambodian sovereignty, maintained through Ang Mey, was thin indeed. The Western Citadel Command was headquartered in Phnom Penh, signaling a shift in administrative power away from the traditional capital of Udong, which was still the seat of Ang Mey's symbolic monarchy. This strategic move allowed the Vietnamese to centralize their control, bypassing the Khmer court entirely. Vietnamese officials, known as mandarins, were installed at every level of government, from provincial administration down to local districts. They effectively superseded Khmer officials, making all significant decisions and ensuring that Cambodian policies aligned perfectly with Hanoi's imperial agenda. The Vietnamese system of governance was rigorously applied. Taxes, once collected by Khmer officials for the Cambodian crown, were now directly levied and collected by Vietnamese authorities. This stripped the Cambodian monarchy of its financial independence and funneled vital resources directly into the Vietnamese treasury. Forced labor continued unabated, with Khmer men conscripted for large-scale Vietnamese infrastructure projects, further exacerbating the suffering of the populace. Ang Mey herself became a figurehead in a puppet government. Her royal decrees were drafted and approved by Vietnamese advisors, her appointments were subject to their veto, and her every public appearance was carefully managed. She resided in Udong, surrounded by Vietnamese guards and officials, her palace a symbol of her gilded captivity. The Vietnamese even began to interfere directly in Cambodian culture and religion. Efforts were made to introduce Vietnamese customs, language, and legal codes with a clear intention of integrating Cambodia into the Vietnamese cultural sphere. While these efforts met with resistance from the deeply rooted Khmer traditions and Buddhism, they represented a systematic attempt to erase Cambodia's distinct identity. The concept of protection was a cruel euphemism. Vietnam's protection was a suffocating embrace that slowly choked the life out of Cambodian independence. The establishment of Trens Tay Tung marked the darkest period for Cambodian sovereignty, where the very institutions of the state were dismantled and replaced by foreign structures. Ang Mey, the reluctant queen, presided over this systematic subjugation, a silent witness to the complete erosion of her kingdom's autonomy, her heart undoubtedly heavy with the burden of her powerlessness.
Siamese counter-intervention, Ang Duong's return. The Vietnamese move to enthrone Ang Mey as a puppet queen and establish direct control through Trens Tay Tung did not go unnoticed, nor unchallenged by Siam. Bangkok viewed this as a direct affront to its own regional ambitions and a dangerous shift in the balance of power. The Siamese court was incensed, recognizing that Cambodia was rapidly slipping entirely into the Vietnamese sphere of influence. Their response was swift and decisive. Siam had a ready and willing claimant to the Cambodian throne in Prince Ang Duong, Ang Chan II's half-brother, who had long been living in exile in Bangkok. Ang Duong, a seasoned and ambitious prince, was seen by Siam as their legitimate candidate to restore Siamese influence over Cambodia. He represented a strong, male alternative to the Vietnamese-backed female monarch, and his presence provided a rallying point for many Khmer nobles and commoners who resented Vietnamese domination. In 1840, Siam launched a significant military intervention, sending its forces across the western border into Cambodia. The stated aim was to liberate Cambodia from Vietnamese oppression and install Ang Duong as the rightful king.
However, the underlying motive was clearly to replace Vietnamese control with Siamese control, effectively making Cambodia a Siamese vassal state. The western provinces, already under Siamese influence, served as crucial staging grounds for these incursions. Battambang, governed by the loyal Uphiya Wang family, became a key stronghold for Siamese forces, providing logistical support and a secure base of operations. The Siamese armies pushed eastward, engaging Vietnamese garrisons and attempting to rally Khmer support. These military campaigns were brutal, turning Cambodia into a devastating battleground once again. Villages were caught between warring armies, civilians were conscripted by both sides, and the land itself was scarred by conflict. The Khmer people, already suffering under Vietnamese rule, now faced the added burden of a foreign war being fought on their soil, ostensibly for their liberation, but ultimately for the benefit of rival empires. Ang Mey, confined in Odong, could only watch as her country was torn apart. The Siamese counter-intervention further highlighted her powerlessness, as she could neither effectively resist the Vietnamese nor genuinely welcome the Siamese without betraying her Vietnamese patrons. Her reign, already a tragedy, became a symbol of a nation caught in an inescapable geopolitical vice, squeezed between two relentless expansionist powers. The return of Ang Duong, backed by Siamese arms, signaled a new phase of intense conflict and continued suffering for Cambodia, demonstrating that even a puppet monarchy could not guarantee peace or stability in a region dominated by imperial ambitions.
The Three Sisters' Plight, Ang Ben's Tragic Fate. Queen Ang Mey's personal tragedy was inextricably linked to the fate of her younger sisters, Ang Ben, Ang Piu, and Ang Squan. These princesses, like their elder sister, were pawns in the brutal game of regional power, their lives dictated by the whims of foreign empires. As Ang Mey became the Vietnamese puppet queen, her sisters remained by her side in Udong, living under the omnipresent surveillance of Vietnamese officials. The Vietnamese, constantly paranoid about potential Siamese influence, viewed the princesses with deep suspicion. They feared that any of them might be used by Siam to destabilize Ang Mey's already fragile rule or to provide a legitimate alternative claimant to the throne. This paranoia would soon lead to a horrifying act of brutality that deeply scarred Ang Mey and her family. The most tragic fate befell Princess Ang Ben. In a climate of intense suspicion and political maneuvering, Ang Ben was accused by the Vietnamese of conspiring with Siam. The exact details of the alleged conspiracy remain murky in historical records, likely fabricated or exaggerated by Vietnamese mandarins eager to consolidate their control and eliminate any potential threats. Regardless of the truth, the accusation itself was a death sentence. The Vietnamese, determined to demonstrate their absolute power and to send a chilling warning to anyone contemplating defiance, subjected Ang Ben to a brutal execution. This act was not merely a judicial punishment, it was a public display of force, a calculated move to terrorize the Cambodian royal family and nobility into complete submission. The execution of Ang Ben sent shockwaves through the royal court and the entire kingdom. For Ang Mey, it was a profound personal loss and a stark, terrifying reminder of her own powerlessness. To witness her sister, a member of her own flesh and blood, executed by the very protectors who had placed her on the throne, must have been an unbearable torment. It cemented her status as a prisoner in her own palace, a queen without authority, forced to preside over the destruction of her family and her nation. Ang Piu and Ang Squan, the remaining sisters, lived under an even heavier cloud of fear after Ang Ben's death. Their lives became a constant vigil against further accusations, their every move scrutinized. Ang Mey's isolation deepened, surrounded by foreign overseers and haunted by the ghost of her murdered sister. The plight of the three sisters serves as a poignant microcosm of Cambodia's suffering during this period. Stripped of their agency, used as political tools, and subjected to unspeakable cruelty, they embody the tragic fate of a nation caught between ruthless imperial ambitions. Ang Mey's reign was not just a political saga, it was a deeply personal tragedy, played out on a national stage, where the bonds of family were brutally severed by the forces of foreign domination.